Well, blessings, everybody, and welcome to the next video in our series. This is video number 2 of lesson 5. Be certain that you read the first chapter of Habakkuk. If you've been doing the videos with us, you've probably already read the entire book. It's just 3 chapters long. But these are very, very important principles, very important stories for us to understand. And probably the primary thing that we're going to get out of these times together when you look in the Word right here is you're going to get such a greater and more intense understanding about who God is and how He relates to us and how we can approach Him and just how He operates. So what we see here, I actually entitled this "The Violent Judging Violence" because that's what you see going on here, a lot of violence. Habakkuk says that he was surrounded by violence, and this violence was in God's holy land, and it was being committed by God's own people. God's law was being ignored, justice was being perverted, it wasn't being upheld because they were ignoring the law. There was all sorts of strife, contention. There was iniquity toward one another, and the wicked surrounded the righteous. Now, I want to be honest with you. I've been in this church before, okay? I've been in situations like this where those who profess to be believers, who profess to be the people of the Lord, acted and behaved this way. And so Habakkuk says, well, Lord, I'm surrounded by this. So Habakkuk comes and he questions God. And he asks him 2 questions. He says, Lord, how long will this occur, and why is this happening? He was basically saying this, God, why aren't you doing something about this? Quite often people think, well, you can't come and judge God in that way. You can't question Him this way. You can't approach Him that way. Sure you can. The Lord knows our heart. It's the intent of the heart that's important. So God answers him. And God said, you know what? I am doing something. But even if I told you what I was doing, you wouldn't believe me. And then he goes and tells him what he's going to do. He says, I'm raising up the Chaldeans against Judah. Now, this was nowhere on Habakkuk's radar as far as an answer to the question, okay? Because these Chaldeans, we learned a lot about them in the first chapter right here, and it's been cross-referenced. God called them a fierce, impetuous, and violent people. They were ruthless. They marched throughout the earth. They seized what was not theirs. There was dread from everybody upon them. Everybody feared them. And their justice and their authority originated with themselves. Now, the Chaldeans and the Babylonians, this became synonymous for the group of people that would become Babylonians. There is some distinction and separation as it evolved, but for our purposes now, it's good enough to understand it that way. That they really thought that they had no law except their own, okay? They came along and said, we are the people, we will do what we want to do. Their law was self-generated. They would swoop down, it was described this way, and devour their prey like an eagle. And they collected large numbers of captives. They laughed at the kings. They passed on like the wind and were gone. Well, when God answers this way, Habakkuk speaks to the Lord about his answer. And Habakkuk rejoiced in the fact, he said, well, I know that we will not die. We will not be eradicated. He did not know this necessarily about him personally, but he was talking about the people of the Lord as a people. We, with our Western mindsets, rarely, if ever, think that way. You know, our history is our lifetime. We think nothing of the past, and we definitely think nothing of the future. And what is it that might be happening that we're doing today that would affect something 3 generations down the road if the Lord tarries? We don't think that way, but that's what he was saying. I'm glad to know that the people will not be eradicated. He knew God, and he knew that God was trustworthy. He also knew that Judah had to be judged for disobedience, and he knew but he also knew that God would not turn away from them because of his covenant nature and the covenant that he had made with his people. Habakkuk knew that God had appointed the Babylonians to judge and correct. And the judgment correction from God is designed to lead to repentance. He knew this. He knew that God was his rock, that he was strong and reliable, and he knew that God would not approve of sin and wickedness. But he did what we sometimes do. Sometimes believers want God to do something, but then they want to tell him how to do it and what to do. You ever done that before? And at the end of the chapter, we see right here that Habakkuk knew how terrible the Chaldeans would be, and he wondered, how in the world can a pure and holy God use somebody that is that wicked and that violent, even though he knew that God would come later and judge them? You know, we think the same way today, and there's much for us to reflect upon. The bottom line is this: are we going to trust the Lord, or are we going to trust what we want him to do? Again, I'm Dale from the Precept classes in Cullman, Alabama, and I'll see you again next time.